This is the story of the ancient ruler of Adalie, Olivier Everhart. Olivier was born in a small village at the bottom of the mountain. This village was impoverished, and there wasn't enough food to go around, so his parents left him on the steps of an older couple's home that lives in the gnome village nearby. It was a hard decision for his parents, but they knew what was best for him. He was found and raised by the Shire whales, Faenbel, and Faenbel whales. Ever since the couple got married, they dreamed of having children but couldn't. The day that Olivier was found on their doorstep changed their lives forever. As Olivier grew up, he was taught many lessons from the gnomes in his village. He learned kindness and patience. He learned to respect the animals in the forest and respect the ways of others. But most of all, he learned from his father, Faenbel, how to be a leader. At a young age, he learns to stick up for those who can't do it themselves and be a role model to those younger than him. On Olivier's 18th birthday, he came home from fishing to find his father and mother sitting at the fireplace, talking about something quietly. He walked up to them and quietly said, "Hello, mother. Hello, father. I'm back from fishing. I caught a couple of lurklish and a rainbow bleglen for supper." As he put the fish in a basket on the kitchen table, he stopped and looked at them. They seemed very worried. "Son?" his father said. "A messenger came from the top of the mountain. He needs soldiers. There is an upcoming war with the warlord from the far kingdom. Warlord's name is Requiem Marth. He is a very evil man that wants to get rid of the magical folk in our land." His father stood up and put his hand on his son's shoulder. He looked into his eyes and said, "Olivier, there will be a day when soldiers will come and take you to fight and battle. On that day, I want you to remember everything that your mother and I have taught you who you are, my son." At that moment, Olivier's mother stood up and ran to her bedroom. He could hear her crying. He could hear her pain. After all, Olivier was their only child. The thought of losing him was more than she could bear. Days went into weeks, and the day finally came when men from the top of the mountain came for Olivier. They stood at the center of the village, blowing a horn and summoning all the villagers. A soldier with a large sword and many daggers stepped forward. He said, "They are taking young men from each village to fight against Requiem Marth." The soldier said that the young man had 2 hours to get their things said and goodbye to loved ones before they set out. When Faenbel heard this, she dropped to her knees. Faenbel looks distraught, but he helps his wife off the ground and brings her back to their home. Olivier followed his parents. His father started packing his things. Even though he didn't want his only son to go to war, he had no choice. When things like this happen, soldiers come to your village. You have no choice but to go. Olivier cried at his father's feet, begging him to hide him so he wouldn't have to go, but his father knew it was either he went or more trouble would happen for Olivier. Olivier wasn't a fighter. He was raised by pacifists that didn't believe in war. He told his son to stand up and be brave. He and Faenbel hugged their son and walked him to the town center. There they said their goodbyes, and Olivier walked off with the soldiers. He walked for days and ended up at their training encampment. There Olivier was trained in all the necessary things to fight and survive during the war. Olivier did not agree with some of the things he was being taught. He remembered his father's words to remember who he was, to remember what he believed in, not what he was being forced to think. Even though it was challenging, he seemed to get through the hardest parts of basic training. A couple of weeks later, visitors came into the camp. It was one of the soldiers' family members. His mother and father and sister visited him. When Olivier saw the family, he couldn't take his eyes off the soldier's sister. She was beautiful. She had braided brown hair and beautiful green eyes. When Olivier saw her, she knew she would be his wife one day. As the soldier's family came into camp and introduced themselves to them, they passed out treats and food to each soldier. When the sister came to Olivier to hand him his treats, he stood up and said, "Thank you, my lady. My name is Olivier. What would be your name?" The sister looked at him and smiled. She said, "You're welcome. My name is Elder." Before Olivier could talk to her more, her mother called for her to come and give more treats to other soldiers. After Elder and her family left, Olivier could not stop thinking about her. Elder and her family came to visit many other times. Every time Olivier and she talked a little. They talked about Olivier's family, Elder's life at home, and even Elder's beloved reindeer Etzel was a massive topic for the both of them. Olivier used to help his neighbor Hunsmit raise reindeer for the winter parade. They both loved being around each other. One day Elder convinced her father to let her stay at the camp a little longer so she and Olivier could go on a picnic together. Her father reluctantly agreed, and after, the young couple went out on their first courtship. After months of courting, Olivier asked the general for a 2-day leave. He walked into the nearby village where Elder lived. He walked to her farm to meet her father and to ask him for her hand in marriage. Olivier walked up the steps to Elder's farmhouse. Her father was sitting on the porch in his old rocking chair. Olivier walked up to Elder's father and put out his hand for a handshake. Her father stood up and walked closer to look him in the eye. Olivier quietly said, "Sir, I am here to ask for Elder's hand in marriage. Sir, I think your daughter is so amazing and special. I love her and want to spend the rest of my life with her. Elder's father sighed and sat down in his chair. He motioned for Olivier to sit in the chair next to him. Olivier, I envisioned the day that a young man would come and want to marry Elder. On that day, I imagined a kind, strong, brave man who loved my daughter through anything. Olivier, I think that is you, and I give you permission to wed my daughter. Olivier was so excited, but he remained in control of his emotion. He stood up from his chair and shook the hand of his soon-to-be father-in-law. Elder's father stood up, opened the front door to his home, and called Elder to come to the front porch. When she appeared, she was shocked to see Olivier. Elder, her father said, Olivier would like to ask you something. Elder looked at Olivier with confusion on her face. Olivier took Elder's hands and got down on one knee. Elder, I love you so much. I love the way you laugh, the way you hide your smile when you giggle. Tears welled up in Elder's eyes. Olivier continued, I love how your green eyes remind me of beautiful emeralds. He held her hands tighter. Elder, I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you honor me and be my wife? Elder fell to her knees, crying. She looked into Olivier's eyes and said yes. You have made me the happiest man alive, Elder. He picked her up and spun her. He then had dinner with his new fiancée and her family. That night he walked back to the camp smiling from ear to ear. The smile did not last long. The soldiers would be sent to battle at the end of the week. Olivier was fitted for armor and was given a sword. The night before, Olivier left for battle. He went to Elder's house to say goodbye. He promised her that he would make it back home, then they would have their beautiful wedding. Elder held Olivier and cried. She knew he was trying to make her feel better and could not make that a promise. Her family gave Olivier gifts and food to keep him healthy and show that they cared. The soldiers left the camp in the morning and headed over the mountain. It was a long trip, but Olivier and the other soldiers made it to their destination. They rested for the night. Tomorrow they would go to the battlefield. Morning came, and Olivier was mentally preparing himself for the battle ahead. He and the other soldiers got their armor on and headed straight for the battlefield. The soldiers walked for an hour until they finally reached their destination. The captain yelled for them to be ready for anything. This warlord has many tricks up his sleeve. He darkly uses magic. The soldiers whispered among each other, telling each other all the horrible things they'd heard about Requiem Marth. Some soldiers have heard he uses dark magic to throw enemies into other realms. Others have heard that he uses the power of ancient rulers to get his bidding done. The captain told the soldiers to get all of the nonsense they were thinking out of their heads. He wanted them to be prepared for what was to come. At that moment, a dark cloud with thunder and lightning appeared in the sky. The wind blew so fiercely that it almost knocked some soldiers off their feet. Then they appeared. Two massive orcs walked toward the soldiers. Between them was Requiem Marth. He was an older man with long grey and black hair. He looked at the soldiers and laughed. Oh, this is what you bring to me? He scoffed. He then looked at his orcs and commanded them to take out the entire army. In an instant, the entire group of soldiers was thrown about the battlefield. Olivier managed to dodge the orcs' attack. He used the knowledge he learned from the gnomes to outmaneuver any creature. He managed to jump into a tree and climb onto the back of one of the orcs, knocking him into the other and rendering them unconscious. This highly upset Requiem. He has never been defeated in battle before. No one has ever taken out any of his creatures. Olivier ran at Requiem. He tried to attack him with his sword. Requiem used a magical spell to make Olivier fly backward and hit a tree. As Olivier tried to get up, he couldn't. Requiem stood over him and laughed. Stupid boy, he said. As if you could defeat me. Requiem then pulled out his wand and opened the portal. His last words were, "We will meet again, boy, I will never forget." Requiem then disappears through the portal. The dark clouds disappeared, and so did the unconscious orcs lying in the field. Olivier then lost consciousness. Soon people came to tend to the injured soldiers. Olivier was brought back to the infirmary. He had 2 broken ribs and a broken arm. To everybody that day, Olivier was a hero. He was known throughout the land as a man who almost defeated Requiem Marth. There was a big ceremony that Olivier's parents and fiancée attended. He was celebrated as a hero, but all he wanted to do was go home and rest. After weeks of recuperating, Olivier was back on his feet and resting in the gnome village. He and Elder got married later that month. It was a beautiful wedding ceremony. Elder wore a beautiful light green gown made by beautiful seamstresses in Azura, while Olivier wore clothing similar to his father's clothing when he married his mother. It was a dark green tunic with gold trim and black boots with gold emerald-encrusted buckles. It was a quiet ceremony. Both families were present. It was a lovely night of dancing and eating with wonderful friends and family. The lovely couple went on their merry way at the night's end. The young couple is very excited to call each other husband and wife, days after the wedding, to look for a place to live. They found this lovely home on the waterfront in the small village near their families. Olivier worked in the nearest gnome village as a blacksmith apprentice, while Elder goes back to her family's house every day to work with the reindeer. One day Elder came home and told Olivier about this nice man she came across on her way home. Elder was talking non-stop about this man she met on her way home. She said he was older, lonely, and had no wife or children. She invited him to come to dinner the next day. Olivier was unhappy about a man he had never met coming to his home. He thought his wife was a good judge of character, so he agreed. Elda stayed home from going to her family's house and cooked all day. She was very excited because the first guest she's had in their new home. That night Olivier left work early to come home. He was running late and expected his guest to be there already. When he walked up to his house, the lights were out. He was confused. She would never put the lights out until he got home. He sensed that there was something wrong. He ran up the steps and threw the door open. He saw a small fire in the fireplace and someone sitting in the rocking chair. He ran up to it and found Elda tied to the chair. When he went to untie her, she shook her head and looked into the corner of the room. Olivier heard slow clapping out from the corner. Is it a familiar face? It was Requiem Marth. See, boy, I told you I would never forget. I found your precious wife while walking through the villages, looking for you. How great for me that she was so naive to allow a stranger into her home. Olivier had anger in his eyes. He was fuming. He lunged at Requiem but used magic to throw him against the wall. A fight ensued. Punches were thrown, daggers were hurled. It all ended when Requiem pulled out his winding and used a paralyzing still on Olivier. Requiem summoned trolls from outside to hold up Olivier for his last act of revenge. He walked up to Elda. He opens a portal. Elda was terrified. She had tears in her eyes. She cried for Olivier. Olivier could do nothing. He screamed, but nothing came out. At that moment, Requiem said, "Say goodbye, boy." Requiem threw Elda into the portal. Olivier screamed and cried. Requiem laughed at his pain. "This is what you get coming after me. Why do you think others run when the army comes for them?" The trolls then drop Olivier, who is still paralyzed. He was distraught. Who is the love of his life, the woman he wanted to spend every moment of every day with until the end. Requiem turned his back for a second, thinking nothing could go wrong, but Olivier used all his strength to get up, and he rushed Requiem, knocking him into the portal to the beyond. Olivier did it. He defeated Requiem Marth but lost his only love. Olivier stayed at the portal, hoping that his wife would come back. Olivier waited for years by that portal for Elda to come back. She never did. He was made king for defeating the worst warlord known to the kingdom. He never remarried. He never had children. The kingdom was passed down to generations of gnome nobility. Olivier Everhart was the first ancient ruler of Adalie. May he rest in the Elysian forest.